Hello everyone, I'm Ron Grant, coming to you live and direct from Tortola in the Virgin Islands. You're watching 284Media. Thank you so much for your time. The BVI Christian Council was granted permission to join the Attorney General of the Virgin Islands as an interested party in the same-sex marriage case presently in the High Court involving two local women against the BVI government in a 4-day hearing. Joining me today is one of the two lawyers, of course, representing the BVI Christian Council, Andrea M. Williams. She is founder and CEO, Christian Concern and the Christian Legal Center. Andrea has qualified as a barrister in 1988 and has practiced at all levels of the British judicial system. She is the founder of Christian Concern and the Christian Legal Center, which have run some of the highest profile Christian freedom cases and campaigns both in the UK and Europe. We're going to take a quick commercial break, and you don't want to miss this interview. We'll be right back after a quick commercial break.
When you're in need of air conditioning, installation, repairs, or replacement services, Markinson Air Conditioning and Refrigeration has the professional technicians, equipment, parts, and ACs to get the job done right. Markinson Air Conditioning and Refrigeration carries top brands like Daikin, Aircon, Mitsubishi, and more. We're open Monday to Saturday from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Located in Fish Bay. Telephone 340-4114 or 343-9511. Markinson Air Conditioning and Refrigeration, providing exceptional services to the British Virgin Islands since 2015.
Father Jesus, that line along like church service.
Alright, you enjoy the rest of the day. Next customer line, please. Wait, hold on a second.
Yes, Sonny boy, come, yes, son.
Good morning.
Good morning, Sonny boy. Hold on there. You must have cut fun topic.
It's okay, I'll take care of it.
What? No man to take care of me.
How may I assist you? You want top of power?
You want top of power?
Join the prepaid party with CCT and enjoy more affordable data plans, more top-up promotions, more savings with hero bundles, and more value for your money each and every Tuesday with Top Up Turn Up Tuesday. Visit a CCT store today or anywhere CCT Top Up is sold and top up your phone.
5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30. You want top of power?
So tonight, I am an international musician and also a bandman. Let's go behind the scenes. This is how I live my life. Unlimited with CCT.
Viewers, welcome back and thank you so much for your time. CEO Williams, thank you so much for your time and welcome to our studios.
It's great to be here on this beautiful tropical island.
Indeed, we do call it paradise. Now,
Yes.
you have been extremely busy, and as I mentioned, presently there is a case in the High Court of the Virgin Islands involving a same-sex couple, both Virgin Islanders, two women particularly, who were married in 2019 in the UK and have subsequently sought legal recognition of their union within the BVI. They are seeking that the court decides in favor of recognizing their union. Now, Ms. Williams, you are in the territory joined by your colleague Michael Phillips, counsel, who is counsel for the BVI Christian Council. Now, the BVI Christian Council, to whom you are representing, was granted permission again to join the Attorney General of the Virgin Islands on this hearing as an interested party.
Yes.
I want to begin by exactly telling us what you know about the case, what you can tell us, and how you got involved. Have you seen this type of work or similar work before?
Absolutely, it's happening all across the world, and indeed it's formed for the past 20 years, in a sense, very much of my work as a lawyer within the United Kingdom. And what I'm seeing happening in the British Virgin Islands is exactly the kind of thing that has been happening not just in Great Britain, but across countries in Europe and indeed across the world. You mentioned that this couple in the British Virgin Islands, these two ladies, Kirsten and Kanisha, that they in fact took a marriage license under the Same-Sex Marriage Act in the United Kingdom. They took a marriage license in 2019. They didn't actually, they spent one day, I think, it was something like that, after gaining that license before returning to the United Kingdom. And actually it was their marriage was then deemed retrospective because they had had a civil partnership a number of years earlier, which they also gained from the United Kingdom. And they've come back to the British Virgin Islands where same-sex marriage is not lawful, and are now asking for their marriage that took place in the United Kingdom to be recognised within the British Virgin Islands. But of course the marriage that was made in the United Kingdom is not something that is recognised here in the British Virgin Islands, because still your law says that marriage is a lifelong union between one man and one woman.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because now in the hearings, your team, of course, representing the BVI Christian Council, have argued that the BVI Constitution does not fall under the English law and that there is really no legal requirement or jurisdiction for same-sex marriage to be introduced to the islands. Additionally, your team has also argued that any chance of that status quo being changed must come from the BVI legislator. Am I correct?
That's absolutely right. Well, something that we've said, and something that's very clear, very clear when we come here to the BVI, is that you're an island, your cultural identity is very distinct, and indeed you're very different from Great Britain. And there's a sense in which if ever there were a case of cultural colonialism, of this notion that somehow progress is to extend marriage to two men and to two women, and this is something that must be accepted because it is a fundamental human right, that every person has a fundamental human right to be married. Well, that's an argument that the Christian Council wants to firmly resist.
Okay, well, we're going to get into that, and I'm glad you brought that up, because at the end of the day, now, you mentioned, and I absolutely love the background that you provided to, of course, put this into perspective for our audience. But in our Constitution of the Virgin Islands, under the section, just like you mentioned, for fundamental rights and freedoms, there is the protection for private and family life and protection of the right to marry and create a family. Are you essentially, Ms. Williams, saying that same-sex couples who love and are committed to each other and decide to form a life together are somehow supposed to be deprived of these fundamental rights and freedoms that are afforded to every citizen? Well,
the truth is this: there's not, in law, there's not really across the world, in terms of legal philosophy, there's not a fundamental human right to be married. There are many reasons why people are unable to marry. Perhaps they don't meet the right person, for instance.
Correct.
But the truth is this: for then the whole of the definition of marriage to be redefined to extend to two men and to two women is to undermine the very nature of marriage itself, which in a sense pre-exists law. We've got to remember this phenomenon of it being a right for two men or two women to be married is something that's very recent.
Okay.
The whole of history and the whole, certainly of Western culture, certainly the whole of culture around the BVI has always been clear that marriage is between a man and woman. That's been firmly understood within the law, but also it pre-exists the law.
Okay.
And the state only has an interest in it because it's a public good.
So I have to ask you again, essentially, because of that and because of the way that was written, are you then saying that that is the end all? You're then depriving, essentially, someone else of that right? That right is only for, in your opinion, a man and a woman. Am I correct?
It's not the deprivation of a right if there isn't a fundamental right to marriage. The truth is this: no one is saying to these two ladies or to two men, you can't have a relationship. There's a sense in which the state doesn't have an interest in this, but it does firmly have an interest in what defines marriage, what is good for what is marriage, what is good for society, what is good for the raising of children, what is it that we need to protect.
And who decides what is good?
Well, there we are. Who decides what is good? If you end up with a whole series of laws or human rights that say, this is what I want, this is what I want, this is what I want, you end up very often with a conflict of rights. So what we've seen in the United Kingdom, for instance, now is a situation whereby same-sex marriage has become legal. And then those who say, for instance, that I am enabling conscience to provide over a civil ceremony of two men or two women, they then are forced out of their jobs. Teachers that say that marriage is between a man and a woman may find themselves disciplined. We have chaplains in schools being reported to our terrorism organisation because it's said that they discriminate because they simply say that marriage is between a man and a woman. And indeed, next week in our courts, a social worker who has posted on social media his belief that marriage is between one man and one woman has been deemed to be unfit to be a social worker unless he affirms LGBTQI ideology.
I understand that, and I thank you for using those examples because it fits exactly into the decision. Now, if in favor of the couple, it could invalidate, essentially, if their request is granted, it could invalidate the Section 13, number 1C of the Matrimonial Proceedings and Property Act, which currently stipulates that, just like you said, that marriage is valid only between a male and a female. Now, is this, and I have to reiterate this, is this the single premise for which the BVI Christian Council is seeking to not have that couple's request granted? What other grounds have been presented to support the BVI Christian Council's claims outside of this?
Well, essentially what you have here is a situation whereby English law is being imported, or a challenge is being made, strategic litigation is being made in this territory to fundamentally weaken an institution which is marriage.
Okay.
So this is strategic litigation which is being brought in order to bring this question to the fore within your society, and in a sense to put pressure on the government. So the UK government is applying pressure to your assembly in order to change marriage, in order to change the fundamental meaning of marriage. So it's something much bigger than just the human rights of two individuals. This case is brought because they were unable to get a joint lease for a car, a joint loan for a car, and that's how this whole thing started, in terms of saying my rights are being denied because my same-sex marriage is not being recognised in this particular jurisdiction.
Now, there are persons who would essentially say that with us, just like the couple is saying, being a UK territory, outside of the same-sex marriage issue, there have been a number of other aspects that have been seemingly imposed on us, and we have not, like we're doing with same-sex marriage, had a conversation. So is it just the marriage aspect that we're having a problem with? Because the UK does quite a bit on overseas territories. We can go through the list of their impositions, but those are not discussed.
This is absolutely fundamental to the whole of your society and how it operates. This is not just about the rights for two individuals. It's about fundamentally the structure of family within your law.
Understood.
Because as soon as this is opened up in terms of how family is then defined in your law, it's not just about marriage, it's not just about rights and the defining of marriage and rights. It then becomes about how family is structured, who is able to adopt, who is able to foster, who is able to access fertility treatments, the very structure of family itself. It then becomes something that is promoted as a social good, promoted within the schools. All of this becomes a norm. And there's a sense in which your constitution says that we're a nation under God, we're a nation that believes in God, that we are there for the well-being of the people in this territory. And there's a sense right now in which your territory is going to choose. Do we choose God? Do we choose that God that we have known in the BVI? Do we choose the Christian framework, which we have held on to within the BVI? Thank you for mentioning that. The Christian framework. Is this something that we hold on to, or is it something that we let go? And so you are at a turning point, I would say, in the life of this particular territory. And that's really critical. Will you be a group of people that goes the way of the West, that goes the way of Great Britain, where we have seen, in a sense, not the freedom that the supposed giving of rights brings, but rather a massive conflict and a suppression of freedom of speech, freedom of expression. This very last week, there have been 4 or 5 high-profile cases in the United Kingdom where bank accounts have been removed or frozen from organisations which refuse to promote, refuse to celebrate, and that's all I can say it is.
Understood.
LGBTI lifestyles and ideology.
Now, should the court decide in favor of the Virgin Islands couple, what will be the next step as counsel for the BVI Christian Council? What will be the next step for the agency?
Should they win? That is a move fundamentally towards a whole restructuring of your society. So your society really needs to choose what it is that you want. But should that win,
yes,
it's actually fundamentally weakening the foundations of marriage and family within your society.
What would the council do in that regard? What would be their next step?
Well,
Christian Council.
My advice for sure would be to appeal that to the Court of Appeal. That is what we would do.
Okay, and should the young lady's desire not be recognized, the same question, what will be the continued approach of the council?
Should they not win? The council will continue to contend that marriage as between one man and one woman, as understood in the BVI since the beginning of time, is for freedom and for flourishing for all.
Okay.
And thereby it holds the good of the people. And we have only love and compassion for the 2 women that have brought this case. We understand that they may be hurting, that they may long to assert this right. But we say that the good of this territory and the good of society in general is when marriage is upheld.
Okay. I have to ask about financing. Of course, the legal team who's representing the BVI Christian Council, of course, sharing in the same belief of the Attorney General. How is all of the work that you're doing being financed?
Well, it's an extraordinary work of faith and charity that is the work of the Christian Legal Centre, and we are an organisation that has now been supported over many years by the faithful those that faithfully support us in the United Kingdom.
All right. Now, I have to go into some details, viewers, and I want you to pay attention to this. In the Constitution of the Virgin Islands, under the section for fundamental rights and freedoms, there is a protection for private and family life and protection of the right to marry and create a family. I want to ask you, Ms. Williams, are you essentially saying that same-sex couples who love and are committed to each other and decide to form a life together are somehow supposed to be deprived of these fundamental rights? And they are fundamental rights because they are written, and freedoms that are afforded to every single citizen.
what is marriage? That's the fundamental question that is being asked here. So if marriage is understood, as it's always been understood, as the lifelong union between one man and one woman, then some people are simply unable to be married if they choose a certain way
So
to
they're
live.
being deprived of that, essentially.
They're not, no, because actually if you choose to live a certain way, then marriage is not open to you. They will have a family, they will come from parents, they will have siblings, but actually the idea, things, if you begin to fundamentally redefine marriage, if you begin to open it up because someone says, I want it, essentially, it is my right, that's a redefining of family. Family, we have to understand what the definition is with regard to family. And what it's always been, how it's always started, is with the fundamental building block of one man and one woman within marriage, as marriage is currently defined in your constitution.
Understood.
Once you do that, the kind of arguments that are actually being made in the United States at this point are arguments for to say, well, my marriage, I would contend for a polygamous marriage. Muslims would contend for multiple wives. So actually that's what the door gets opened to those things of the wholesale redefining of family, whereas the public good in this territory has been seen as the definition of marriage as defined within the Bible of one man and one woman united together for life and for the procreation of children within that construct, which is a social good. And that is how societies across the world have flourished over centuries. It's where children are protected, it's where children do best.
I'm so happy, Ms. Williams, that you brought up the Bible. Of course, the reliance on the Bible when it comes to same-sex unions seems to have been getting very special treatment, and I'll explain. Especially from the BVI Christian Council. It has been stated by many that the BVI Christian Council within our society is weak. And when I say that, they are silent on a number of matters and extremely quiet when the questions are asked. Now, areas affecting crime, affecting drugs, a number of issues, gambling, all of that stuff. Now, you may not be aware, and I'm not sure if you are aware as council, but when the gambling law was passed in the Virgin Islands, the BVI Christian Council was silent. When the marijuana law was passed in the council, they were also silent. When the former premier of these Virgin Islands got arrested, the council in a statement asked for prayers for him, even in light of the very terrible allegations that were brought against him and the position that this country was placed in. Now, can you see, council, can you understand why residents may see this very deliberate measure and interest by the BVI Christian Council as total hypocrisy? How do you reconcile this perceived hypocrisy in being quiet on a number of national issues, and there you have one issue out of all that I've just raised, and all of a sudden the BVI Christian Council has a voice?
Well, let me say this. The members of the council that I've met care very deeply about this territory. They care very deeply about the people of this territory. And when, on a previous visit here, I was pleased to visit a number of churches and also a number of the members of the BVI Council who I could see were pouring their hearts and lives into their local communities and doing good. So I commend the work that's being done by the BVI on the ground and by the churches on this island on the ground. So I commend them for that and for the love of the people and for the love of the people caught in these various situations that you may, whether it's gambling or crime, a real care for people caught in those situations. That I actually saw on the ground with my eyes last time I was here in the work that they actually do. When we redefine marriage, this goes fundamentally to the very heart of how a society is structured and governed.
And I understand that, Ms. Williams.
And that is why actually it's so important.
I understand the redefining of marriage.
Yes.
But my question is, based on all of the matters that I just placed to you,
yes,
there is a level and understanding, there's a tone across the country by residents that the effort, particularly by the BVI Christian Council in this regard, is hypocrisy. Because you haven't addressed the other issues, you haven't addressed the gambling, you haven't addressed the marijuana. Saturday gone, at a very family-friendly park the
Yes.
Tortola Pier Park, Sylvie Rumney Tortola Pier Park, House of Luxury, one of our well-known establishments, was robbed. Children are around, families are around, gunshots
Yes.
let go. The Christian Council was again silent. The actions by the Premier, instead of speaking up and denouncing them, you're saying, let's pray for him. That is what has brought this level among residents as, well, what's the sudden interest? So when you look at all of that,
Yes.
why, and can you understand? That's my question. Can you understand
I can understand
the
that may well
idea?
be. I can understand that there may be a
Good.
perception. There may be a
Okay.
perception of this. Let me say that the first thing that was mentioned to me when I came off the plane, and we drove past that jewelry
Store,
was the jewelry store, was exactly what
It was said to you, but publicly, on
I'm
many
saying there was.
issues.
Let me say there was absolute concern about this, and the thing is that the thing about this is actually about this organisation finding its voice and finding its voice on a number of issues. I come here because they reached out to us as an organisation in the United Kingdom that is known, that is
Familiar with this work?
familiar with this work and familiar with this issue. And we came in order, you know, first of all, a couple of years ago when this was all beginning to happen, first of all, in order to just assist them, to provide help, to provide information of what was happening in the United Kingdom, and then honestly, beginning to feel a great love towards your territory and a great love towards your people, and to see the good of your country, and to long to see the good of your country, so that you might not go the way of the United Kingdom, where we now have censorship, where we now have obliteration of conscience, where now, unless you promote and celebrate and approve, you find yourselves losing teaching licenses, losing social work licenses, being reported even to a counter-terrorism squad, church ministers being removed from positions. This is 10 years on from the passing of the Same-Sex Marriage Act, and it even then moves on to the trans issue.
So let me ask you this.
So the point about this, in a sense, is that I don't know the daily runnings or the media mechanisms of everything that BVI Council does or the way in which they pronounce, but on this issue is an issue which is vital for all, for every single citizen, because it goes to the very structure of your society. And of course, those other matters,
gambling,
crime, are really
marijuana,
important indeed. Those crime,
okay.
drugs, they're all very important indeed. And there are certainly policy issues.
And they should be given equal.
And they should be spoken about absolutely for sure. And they should. And I know that the council cares about them. And for sure, these are matters which we care about for the good of society.
What needs to happen?
Strong marriages, by the way, prevent crime. Fathers in the home prevent crime.
Oh, I agree with that. Fathers in the home, absolutely. What needs to happen, Ms. Williams, in order for the BVI Christian Council to effectively serve the country on all matters concerning citizens, not just the ones that are interest to them?
By actually speaking clearly, the truth that this territory has so long held on to, which I contend as Andrea Williams of Christian Concern and the Christian Legal Centre, is rooted in the Bible, is found in Jesus Christ, actually a truth which is absolutely tolerant, cares absolutely for every single citizen. Jesus Christ, the most compassionate, the most beautiful person that ever lived, who died on a cross for every single person.
I'm aware of the story.
Yeah, you're aware of the story, but that's the message. It's a message which is wholly inclusive. It's a message which never compels, it never coerces belief, it never forces. It's a message of sacrifice on a cross, of love, redemption, restoration, hope. But there's also a how now to live. And at the heart of the how now to live is that marriage is a beautiful institution of God between one man and one woman. And this is how we all flourish. And this is for the good of all, because this is actually for the good of all. To uphold that truth is for the good of all.
And I'm going to ask you again, what needs to happen in order for the BVI Christian Council to effectively serve the country on all matters concerning citizens, not just the ones that are of interest to them. What needs to happen? What do they need to do?
I can say this, that the BVI Council has a concern for all citizens, including the two ladies
And if I may say this,
and
are they not able to articulate that themselves?
And certainly bring them into the studio and hear from them. So invite them to your platform.
Absolutely.
Invite them to your platform and and hear from them. But let me say, I've seen heart and I've seen compassion in the BVI Council. But let me say this: what are they to do? Well, what is the church to do? In this territory.
What is the church's role?
What is the church today? The church is to speak publicly of Jesus Christ, to speak proudly, to speak bravely, to speak courageously. And the truth is this: to really love, to really love a nation, to really love a territory, to really love people is to speak truth, and to speak biblical truth. And when we let go of that, then a lot of things go with it. And you only have to look to Great Britain, known across the world, albeit imperfect, but known across the world for institutions that are fair, institutions that are honourable, amazing education systems, health systems, historically all rooted actually in the person of Jesus Christ. Jesus was firmly at the heart of our nation, at the heart of our laws. You only have to look through our common law, dating back to the Magna Carta, to see how his truth, biblical truth, permeates the whole of our legal system until we swapped that for a human rights jurisdiction where the source of law, the source of knowledge became man himself. And then what you end up is a whole competing set of human rights as opposed to a common law, an understanding of something that actually is beyond our own humanity. There is a giver of law.
Speaking of rights, if any, would you say that same-sex couples should be entitled to, or is your objection to the union being called a marriage? Let's break that down. Are you open to the union being called a civil union? Do you think that same-sex couples should absolutely have no rights in this regard? Let's look at the partnership aspect. Are you opposed or are you open to a civil union? Or is it, what is your thoughts on that?
I'm opposed to civil unions because what we've seen historically in every nation where they have been introduced is that they essentially reflect marriage and immediately become marriage. So once civil unions are legalised, same-sex marriage gets legalised shortly thereafter. In every jurisdiction where civil partnerships have been granted and have been spoken of as merely human rights, and the shutting up of the opposition to say, you don't want people to have rights, you don't care about these people, they're second-class citizens. No, I say, you are a beautiful human being. We want you to be, you are protected. We need you to be well protected, generally in law.
Generally in law.
We're all free. We are all free. We are all free citizens. But when I say yes,
clearly we're not free.
Of course we're free.
Because the law in this particular case is disallowing individuals to live regardless of their religious or background. Essentially, the same way you, Ms. Williams, let's take for example, would say that persons are being, these types of measures are being imposed on persons. Are you not imposing your Christian belief on others?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
Absolutely not. You have a constitution that talks about belief in God. And this is the constitution in the BVI that has served your people well. And
as well as the UK?
And you are people, and this people and your people are free here.
Okay.
Within the BVI. People cannot just assert a right and say, we want to wholesale redefine what marriage is. For you to say it's discriminatory that somebody can't be married when it actually undermines the definition of marriage.
Well, what I think is being...
It makes them no less...
What I want us to understand
Yes.
here, and you could correct me if
Yes.
I'm wrong, but the basis of this case is that a marriage was observed, it was done within the UK, for which we are a territory of, and we
Yes.
follow every single rule when it comes to the
No,
UK.
you don't,
But
because
this
actually you have
particular,
a house. You have a house. Isn't it great? Isn't it great that you
we're
have
not
a
talking
local?
about home ownership. We're talking about this particular incident.
Well, you're talking. So you're actually talking about your society and how you want your society to be given on a devolved matter. Marriage is a devolved matter. It's not. It's clearly devolved. When the Same-Sex Marriage Act in the United Kingdom was passed, in Westminster was passed, it was for England and Wales. Even in Scotland and Northern Ireland, that had to go to their parliaments.
So my question
So the
is,
question
when
here-
it comes to the law of marriage
Yes.
that you are defending, which is absolutely fine,
Yeah.
that then defines the rights and privileges over, based on this conversation, it comes across as though it's governing the rights and privileges of home ownership, being able to purchase a car, being able to maybe enroll your child into school. That is the basis of how our entire lives are being governed on the practice of marriage, whether someone is single or they're in a union. Essentially, what I'm getting is, if someone isn't married, if they're single, then perhaps they are missing out, or they are not eligible, or they're essentially being deprived of a lot of other privileges, such as home ownership, car ownership, education.
If you're an unmarried single person because you haven't met the right person, you're not deprived in the way that you've described. You've not met the right person.
And that single aspect
So
does not affect how society, does not affect how the legal system deals with even single people
the point is that
because of their marital status.
marriage is a particular unit of society which the government happens to have an interest in, because to promote...
The government has an interest in it because this case is before the High Court. Outside of that, the government of the Virgin Islands would not have mentioned anything about it. They would have ignored it, and I can guarantee you that.
Sorry, might you repeat that last...
The government of the Virgin Islands would
Yes.
not have had an interest in this topic. We would not be talking about a referendum if this case was not before the High Court.
Yes, and that case has been strategically brought in order to undermine the marriage laws of the BVI, and this is being done across the world, in Africa, it was done in the Cayman Islands, in Bermuda. Strategic litigation was brought in the United Kingdom in order to weaken marriage laws, in order to weaken the fundamental institution. So it's a piece of strategic litigation in order to bring it before the House.
Fair enough. I have to ask you this, though.
And the point I was going to make before was that it's actually very good if a local government that understands its people is making the laws for its people. Why should the BVI, unless it chooses to, but why should the BVI have forced upon it the laws made in Westminster, which even Westminster says they don't want to force upon the territories?
Okay.
Which even Westminster said the Same-Sex Marriage Act 2014 is an act that applies to England and Wales. When for Ireland and Scotland, they had to bring in legislation in their own houses in order to bring this in.
I'm happy that you mentioned legislation and legal aspects, because the legal implications that would come from something like this, if this were to be agreed upon, if the couple were to win, of course we understand that would essentially change. It would indicate that a change needs to be happened or had within our Constitution. But I want to go back to the implications in my previous question. In the case of death of one of the partners, you're opposed to civil unions. We understood that. Are you against other partners inheriting assets acquired during this relationship? Currently, this essentially, the probate rules would completely disregard surviving partners. And do you think that is right?
In life, there are consequences to choosing to live in certain ways.
Correct.
And there are things that happen. That doesn't, so that's life, that's reality. But there's also this. In law, if you want to ensure that people are protected or gifted or given things, you don't have to completely tear up marriage in order to make sure those things happen. If a person wants another person
Correct.
to have their home, or
there's a will,
there are all sorts of ways in which that might happen. That's an absolute red herring. Again, it's a campaign tool in order to make people like me look mean. And we don't feel mean.
We don't think you're mean at all.
No, but the point is, it's a campaign tool. It's campaign language to say you discriminate, you dislike, these are second class. No, these are precious citizens. But actually what they cannot access just by requesting it is marriage, when marriage is a fundamental institution between one man and one woman, and children, and for the procreation of children, for the watching over of children.
And can you understand how that would precisely come across as what we're saying, discrimination? It perhaps is, in your case, it's not the same when it comes to race or ethnicity, because there is discrimination on all levels. But just like you would say to someone, you can't use this bathroom because of your skin color, perhaps you can't enter because of your religion. When it comes to schools, children are being discriminated in. When we talk about discrimination, can you understand how persons of a different belief and of a different lifestyle would truly feel like second-class citizens, like they're being discriminated against when they cannot access?
I think it's a category
and they
error.
cannot be recognized because their idea of a union or marriage is not one of a Christian society or one of a legal institution.
Well, I think that many, it's a fundamental category error. It's a fundamental category error to equate a lifestyle choice.
Correct.
Which is homosexuality.
Correct.
To equate that choice and that behaviour with the colour of skin, which is immutable. So it's a fundamental category error. And I'm sure that many black Christians across the Caribbean and across Africa are insulted at such a comparison. And I put it as strongly as that, because that's the way in which it so often is being portrayed. Every human being is of innate value, loved by God, by the costly blood that was shed by Christ, and he wants people to love him, to be restored unto him, to be forgiven for their sin. And a church in BVI and churches across the Caribbean are deeply Christian people, they will say that all sexual expression outside of marriage is sinful. And that the place for sexual expression is within the context of a lifelong union between one man and one woman. And let me say this, as someone who is in the United Kingdom, we're watching and seeing lost generations of young men and women who've been taught in schools about complete sexual freedom, even to the point now of not understanding whether they're male or female. Our children are suffering. They're suffering in terms of not understanding what it is to have self-regard, in a sense, around these things. There's a lot of chaos that's ensuing, and they long, and actually a strong message about what marriage is doesn't restrict, it's actually freeing, because when that's understood by a society, it leads to a healthy and a happy and a whole society, and a society that also loves and is tolerant to others.
I want to thank you so very much for taking the time out and coming to our studios. Of course, having such a busy schedule and putting into perspective the role of the council, who's presently representing the BVI Christian Council, in addition to, of course, sharing in the same thought process and defense of the Attorney General who is representing the government of the Virgin Islands in this very case. Of course, we here in the territory, as you know, this is a highly anticipated conversation. It is well watched. Of course, I think every citizen of the Virgin Islands is on the edge of their seats, waiting to see what the verdict, of course, will come out of this. The trial lasted about 4 days, and we do thank you for coming and taking the time out and to putting this into perspective, and as you are representing the BVI Christian Council. I appreciate you so much.
Thank you.
You're most welcome. Viewers, that is all the time we have. Of course, as mentioned, we are going to be continually watching as the, of course, verdict and the final decision in this case concerning 2 local women, Virgin Islanders, who are requesting that the court recognize their marriage. I'm Ron Grant. Have a beautiful rest of the day. Thank you so much for your time.